Congratulations, Ron.
Thank you.
I speak for all the people who have loved Boris Karloff for decades, and thank you for this definitive film biography. It is, we're grateful for it, and it will last as long as his career will last in terms of it will always be there for people to go to find out in such enormous detail. And I've seen it more than once now, and I absolutely am constantly impressed by the painstaking work that went into it. So congratulations.
Well, thank you. I heard Max in the beginning thanking everyone involved with the festival. But I just want to make sure we recognize the founder. I want to make sure I pronounce his name right. Mr. Black Bear. Is Mr. Black Bear here? Maybe in the back of the garbage. I don't know.
The men's room.
Black Bear.
So you kind of alluded to it. Well, you kind of just said it in the video. Were you the force behind making this documentary happen? Because you have collaborators, but were you the driving force?
Yeah, as that little clip showed, when I was a child, 7 years old, I got my first Frankenstein model, fell in love with it, joined a Frankenstein fan club and did all that, and then everyone else grew up and got older and moved on to things, but I didn't. I kept collecting, and I loved collecting, and the key is I never threw anything out.
Yeah.
And then when I was 13, I got that card from Karloff, and he really just became a role model, someone that I really looked up to, that persevered. I mean, he was 44 years old. He was living from film to film. He should have given up, but he didn't, because he believed in what he wanted to do, which was act. And in 1997 is when I really first picked up a camera, started taping somebody. Sarah Karloff was one of the first. And just for years I kept saying to her, you know, someday I want to make a film about your dad. And she would smile and said, okay, all right. And we did it. I met up with a film maker named Thomas Hamilton in London, England. That was about 4 years ago, and just things took off. And we had a chance to, I mean, the list of people that contributed to it, it's just amazing. I mean, John Landis and Guillermo del Toro, I mean, they just had such warm things to say about him. It was great. It really was.
Now, when you said you were 7 years old when you had this obsession began, was it at all, you didn't mention the films though, was it at all connected to seeing Frankenstein on television? You mentioned the model, but what films, I assume the monster would be involved,
Right.
but...
Well, in the early 1960s, you had three things going on. You had the models in the toy stores, you had Famous Monsters of Filmland on the newsstands, and then you had the movies late at night. Now, I grew up in the New York area, and there was a guy named John Zachary, and he was the host.
Yeah.
And he kind of introduced me to all these films. Later on, I had a chance to meet him. Wonderful guy. And so all these things were swirling around, and I just gravitated toward those. And that became something that I really fell in love with, and I really had a passion for.
And as you mentioned, Sarah Karloff, I think that is one of the most fascinating things about it, that she's with us and that she could talk so freely. And it's always wonderful when a second generation is so proud and happy about the legacy of a parent in that way. Talk a little bit more about her relationship in terms of when she was talking to you about her dad, her feeling for his work, or feeling for him as a parent, since you know her as a friend.
Yeah, she didn't really officially take over until 1991 when her stepmother passed away. And she was not aware of this whole generation of people that loved her father. She really did not know about it. And she started going to these conventions, and I don't know if you've ever been to a convention, but they have what they call the dealer's room. And she thought it's where people were gambling. But she went down and realized dealers were people that were selling merchandise, selling toys and games and things. And a lot of it was about her father. Sure. So she got to meet these people, she got to meet the fans, and she really did admit in the beginning she learned more about her father through the fans than herself. Yeah. She had her own life, she was doing her own thing. So as the years went by, she was able to learn how important he was. I mean, people came up and they just would go on. I mean, they would have Boris Karloff's picture on their nightstand and just relate to him. And because the way he portrayed the Frankenstein monster, to me, he portrayed it as a creature that was shunned by society and was left all alone. And as a child, sometimes as you grow up, that's how you feel. You feel like you're all by yourself. And he got more fan mail from children than anyone else, because they related to the way he portrayed the monster.
Sure. Another thing that struck me so deeply the first time I saw this was the footage of things I didn't know existed. And if anyone saw something in this movie that they want to see the whole thing of, it's out there, because when I was home watching it the first time, I was making a list during the movie of things I wanted to see where I could find them. Anyway, I found just about everything on YouTube. The silent film The Bells, those episodes of Thriller, and that whole production of The Lark with Julie Harris, and they were all wonderful. And I wanted to ask you, as I was sitting there so surprised and excited, what things did you find along the way that was a surprise that you didn't know existed? I would assume some of that early television stuff, but...
Right, when I first started in 97, there wasn't the internet as it is today. And you're right, there's so many things that are out there. I mean, this man did variety shows. He was singing and dancing, and he did, again, Wild Wild West and The Girl from U.N.C.L.E. I Spy. If you get a chance, please try to see the episode of I Spy. It is so wonderful. He gives a great performance.
Yeah.
So we were able to discover things that we hadn't seen before, and a lot of the silent films that we had never seen before.
Yeah.
So he had learned, again, he learned acting first in Canada. He went from Montreal all the way to Vancouver. From Vancouver, he went to San Francisco. From San Francisco, he's told about the moving picture business. He went down to LA. So 10 years in Canada on stage, and then 10 years in silent films and sound films until Frankenstein. So we discovered a lot of things that were just great.
And I wanted to ask you, since it's so full of these amazing clips, and most people, of course, know The Monster, the 3 Frankenstein movies he did, and of course, things like The Mummy. But there's a lot of great stuff that's not as famous. So I want to know, what are your personal favorites of the Karloff stuff that's not the big stuff?
Right, one of my favorites is The Black Room.
Me too.
The Black Room is so terrific. In that film, in a way, he plays 3 roles. He plays a twin. So there's the evil twin and the good twin. And then the evil twin kills the bad twin, so he becomes the evil twin playing the good twin.
Yeah.
So the way he's playing 3, and the acting is terrific.
It's a great, great performance, and a really cool movie that's mostly still not very well known.
Right. I mean, I think it was David Scull that said that he should have been nominated for an Oscar for The Body Snatcher, but he also should have been nominated for The Black Room, and he should have been nominated for Targets.
Yeah. When you mentioned The Body Snatcher, I was so glad you gave such a nice chunk of the movie to those mid-40s movies produced by Val Lewton, because actually my favorite's Isle of the Dead, the Greek island one.
Right.
And it's like, I would say it's 30 years ahead of its time in terms of content, because all the horror in that is psychological, and he's fantastic in that one.
And the unique thing about that film, I mean, so many movies are made based on plays or based on other movies or whatever. That's the only film I know of that was based on a painting.
Yeah.
Just cool. The painting of the Isle of Dead was the reason for them making that film.
And you also had that brief clip of Lured with Lucy.
Right.
Well, I don't think Lucy was in the clip, but that cool movie with Lucy.
Right.
And he's only in it for a few minutes, but it starts out really funny and then gets really scary.
Yeah,
and again, that's another one that isn't nearly that well known. I wanted to tell you, and I guess people out here too, that Milford is actually in a sort of 2 degrees of separation from Boris Karloff, because you saw he goes to Broadway and does Arsenic and Old Lace. You showed the picture of the cast sitting on the couch.
Right.
The guy who created the role of Mortimer, the role played by Cary Grant in the movie, is Alan Jocelyn, who was born in Milford, Pennsylvania.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
So he was not raised here, but he was born here. So he was on Broadway for how many years with Boris Karloff? So
well, I'll tell you another connection with him. Alan Jocelyn was also in the very first episode of The Addams Family.
Oh, yeah.
And The Addams Family, the butler Lurch, was of course based on Boris Karloff. Now originally when Addams drew The Addams Family, he had the butler big, hulky, long hair and a beard, and that's exactly how Karloff looked in The Old Dark House, as Morgan the butler.
Oh, yeah.
And then eventually changed it to look like the Frankenstein monster. So that's great. I didn't know Alan Jocelyn was... he's also in another film that I love called the Jack Benny film. What was the film?
Is it the?
Oh, The Horn Blows at Midnight.
Yeah.
Great film, and he's great.
In fact, Alan Jocelyn's daughter was here at Black Bear, I think it was 20 years ago. I think it was the first time I was involved. And they did a series at the Columns of films of his.
Oh, that's great.
And she came up, and I think it was her first time here, because I said he wasn't raised here, so they didn't have that connection. The other thing I wanted to tell you was, just 2 weeks ago, we showed the original Frankenstein here on the big screen. And so I'm sure some of the people who were here were there that day, so we got to experience that, his entrance backing up into the movie on the big screen, and I'd never seen the whole movie on a big screen, so it was great. So
yeah, for those of you that had not seen that film, the pivotal scene is when he first appears, when he comes through that door. And in my opinion, he was standing behind that door waiting for action, whatever, and he was standing there as an actor that hardly worked and could hardly pay for food. When he walked through that door and turned around, his whole life changed. His life changed, his career changed, and everything. And he just wanted to act so badly that after that point, he literally never turned anything down. And he continued to succeed in radio and live television and episodic television. He had his own TV series, just wonderful.
So, often when someone is so pigeonholed the way he was from 1931 as a horror guy, even when he proved himself, then people would forget and go right back to imagining him as the horror guy. The movie seemed to say that he was okay with being Frankenstein's monster and that he wasn't bitter and resentful, that he couldn't shake it.
Right, no, not at all. He embraced his being typecast, and he felt that every actor in a way is typecast. If you're young, then you're typecast as being young. If you're romantic, then that's the type of... So he embraced it, but it showed, though, he really did expand, being just the horror. I mean, he ended up being on a quiz show, and his specialty was nursery rhymes. So he was able to know enough nursery rhymes to make lots of money. And then eventually he did Arsenic and Old Lace, and that proved he could do comedy. So then they threw him in some films. So he really did get a chance to expand just that horror realm, and did great stuff.
And as the film says, it makes sense that they didn't let him out of the play contract to make the movie of Arsenic and Old Lace, because they needed him at the box office, because he was the only big name in the cast. But and Raymond Massey is good and all, but it does seem such a wasted opportunity that he could have preserved that. And I know he did it on television several times, but still to have been preserved on the big screen would have been wonderful.
The one version he did, which apparently is out there, but I couldn't find, was done with Orson Bean. Orson Bean played Mortimer in that. But the key to that production is it had Peter Lorre and Boris Karloff. And I just wish I could find that clip, but I can't find it.
There is one I watched later, a whole production, but there's so many with other people.
Yeah,
it's like, who were was it Helen Hayes, Lillian Gish? They all played those roles.
And Tony Randall?
Tony Randall, he's one of them. Yes, he's one of them too.
Do you want to go to the audience?
I think it's time.
Would anyone like to ask a question? I can't see from there. Anyone raise their hand?
Well, we'll start with Lawrence in the front row because we can see him.
Yes, sir.
Well, I know that I've spoken to you before they ran the film, but one thing I was wondering, I realize that with so much footage, it's hard to decide which clips of films to use. I don't mean the stills, but what, why did you not include a clip of the film that he made at Warner's with that all-star cast?
Right. The question is whether we've used enough clips. I now have a DVD and a Blu-ray out that shows not only this film you just saw tonight, but we actually have a second film called Boris Karloff, The Rest of the Story. And we had a chance to go back and show clips that we couldn't show in the first. When we first made this film, I mean, we thought of a 6-part series. We thought of a 3-hour film. There was just so much material. So that's what we did. So when you get the Blu-ray or the DVD, then you'll be able to see not only the original film, but then also film and clips that we just couldn't include in the first one.
The one I was thinking was The Walking Dead.
Right, The Walking Dead, which was directed by Michael Curtiz, who was a great director. He did Casablanca, he did White Christmas, and he did The Walking Dead. What a career. Anybody else? Yes, in the back.
Hi, I grew up in show business, and I was always told at a young age, and this would probably be now recognized as abuse, but my mom, who wasn't a stage mother, quite frankly told me in this business, you're as good as your last job.
Right.
And it seems that Boris, Mr. Karloff, emulated that because he was always working, as you said, to the next job, to the next job. And to have such a body of work that even I, not aware of, you know, but is so enriching, I guess, as an actor. He is really to what I think now after seeing your documentary here, that he was the epitome of an actor's actor, because he did it for the love of what he felt in his gut.
Right. And you know, you're right, you used the word abuse, and I think this is a reason why Karloff was so strong about forming the Screen Actors Guild. A lot of people think of Hollywood and they think of the parties and the premieres and the Oscars, whatever. But it's a tough job. It's really difficult. When he was making Frankenstein, he had to get to the studio at 4 in the morning. 4 hours of makeup. Once he stepped on the stage or that lot, that's when he got paid. So he got paid for nothing beforehand. One scene he had to take Colin Clive and climb up a hill, a mountain, and it was a long shot. And James Will insisted he carry Colin Clive every single time instead of a dummy. So there were really grueling things in the Mummy. The makeup was amazing. In fact, a little side note is when they did all the Mummy costume, whatever, and they started shooting, they forgot to give him a zipper. So eventually they realized. But anyway, he felt that actors should be protected. And actors should work so many hours a day and get paid for overtime and get paid for things. So that's why he was so important. His card number was number 9. So he was one of the original members of the Screen Actors Guild and really cared about actors and filmmakers and what they did. One more? Go ahead.
Great film, and thank you. It's a love letter for all of his fans.
Thanks.
And I just wonder, is it documented if he had a particular film or performance that he was most especially proud of or a favorite?
Okay, so the question is whether he had a favorite. I think he was really, really fond of Targets. He really mentioned Targets as his last film, and technically it was his last American film. He continued to make a few films after that were made in Mexico. I know he was very proud of Frankenstein. I mean, he's always quoted as saying, "The monster was the best friend I ever had." When I look at his career, he did 3 things that an actor hopes for just to get one, but he did 3. And the 3 were, number 1, he was the monster in Frankenstein, that will live on forever. He made his Broadway debut in a role written just for him in Arsenic and Old Lace. And then, of course, he'll always be remembered for How the Grinch Stole Christmas and the voice of the Grinch. So those 3 things, just wonderful, and he did all of them. So, all right, one more, and then we're going to go to the gala. Gala.
Back here.
Go ahead.
Easy question. When and why did he choose Boris Karloff? Was
Okay.
it to sort of springboard or be linked with Bela Lugosi? Like, why would you change your name from Pratt to
Okay.
to Karloff?
There's not a definite answer on why, but he was born William Henry Pratt. And he just thought Pratt wouldn't look good on the marquee. And when he started out in silent films, there was a term in comedies, when you slipped on a banana peel, it was called a pratfall. So he didn't want to be associated with that. My belief is during the time he came up with his name, which was around 1910, 1911, there were many Russian actors that were very influential, and they either wrote books, the Stanislavski method and so forth. And I think because of his dark complexion, and there was a mix of Indian blood and English blood, but because of his, he wanted to come out with an exotic name. So he came up with Boris Karloff. Sarah Karloff says she has no idea where that came from, but she did want it to be a little bit different. And so that's what he picked.